Welcome in the Learning Microsoft Azure course. In this next video, I want to give you a short overview of Microsoft Azure in general. In this video, we're going to talk about concepts of Microsoft Azure data centers, followed by Microsoft Azure components and services we have available today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Azure Marketplace, Azure Service Manager, and Azure Resource Manager. Let me start with some overall Microsoft Azure data center concepts. Azure data centers are available all over the world. At the time of creating this course, the number was 30 all over the world in different regions. Azure data centers are grouped per region. For example, Central US, Western Europe, and some other ones. Besides those 30 globally available data centers, there are also specific market Azure data centers, mainly for government or for specific regions, like in UK or Germany, where those data centers, like in Germany, for example, those data centers are only available for the German market. Every Azure data center is based on a modular containerized architecture. So think of an Azure data center in a specific location, like Western Europe. The physical location is Dublin and Amsterdam. So when you would bring a visit to the Dublin data center, you will find out that it's based on different buildings, and within each building there are multiple containers. Within the container itself provides you enough power and cooling for all equipment inside the container. Each container is equipped with several hundreds or close to 1,000 physical servers, storage components, networking components. Whenever there's a major downfall inside the data center, like shutting down a container and replacing it with a new container, migrating all the workloads, that's how overall the Azure management is done. From a hardware perspective, it's running on custom hardware and using Windows Server Hypervisor. And as I already mentioned, data center cooling power is pretty important, but not to forget that it's also built from an eco-friendly perspective in mind. So like the Dublin data center, again, as an easy example, it's partly cooled by interesting airflow, optimized airflow from the outside. So the Azure regions, in general, 30 regions at the time of creating this course, and basically almost all over the world except in Africa. Several data centers all over the US, split up in different regions. The same for Europe, the same for Asia. Why is this region important? Whenever you deploy resources in Azure, one of the things that you will learn in the remainder of this course, for every Azure resource that you want to deploy, you always have to specify a specific region. That said, one of these services that I will cover later on, one of the things to keep in mind about those Azure services is that not all services are always available at the same time in all regions. So depending on the life cycle of your closest by Azure region, it might be that certain features are not yet available. So very interesting link is azure.microsoft.com/unus for English/regions, getting a detailed view on the active regions and the ones who are on the close roadmap, as well as finding out which Azure services are available in each of those data centers. Now, when talking about Azure components and services, it somehow looks like this. At the bottom layer, we're talking about infrastructure. Think back about IaaS, infrastructure as a service, that I was talking about in the course overview. On the infrastructure side, we talk about Azure Blob Storage, table storage, queue storage, virtual machines, virtual networks, backup and recovery, and Store Simple as a storage appliance solution. Taking it one step up, into the data and application, we can recognize SQL database. I'm not talking about SQL Server within a virtual machine. I'm talking about SQL database within Azure. Machine learning, HD Insight for data analysis, and overall caching services. From an application perspective, you have the option to deploy websites. We call them Azure Web Apps, overall cloud services, mobile services, virtual machines, media services, scheduling tasks, and using Azure automation. And then from an integration perspective, we recognize BizTalk services, Service Bus, allowing you to build interesting Internet of Things solutions, CDN, Content Distribution Network for streaming multimedia or content in general, Traffic Manager virtual networks, and ExpressRoute on the network side. And Azure also provides identity services, which will be covered a lot in detail in one of the later coming videos, Azure Identity and Multi-Factor Authentication. Now, when talking about Azure, one of the easiest ones to start from is the Azure Marketplace. Azure Marketplace is to be seen like an online store providing you more than 4,000 Azure certified solutions, like virtual machines, applications that you can deploy. It's a collection of virtual machine images, applications, or overall Azure services. Azure Marketplace components are provided by Microsoft, third-party vendors, and even community. Very important, very interesting to know is that these Azure Marketplace image solutions are pre-configured for Azure specifically, and it basically means downloading, deploying, and start using. So to give you an idea, but not spending too much time on this one here, it allows you to deploy virtual machines, could be Windows machines, could be specific ones running SAP, could be appliance like virtual machines, a firewall solution like the camp you see in this screenshot, or from a web application website perspective, having a really easy solution to provide you CRM-alike solutions, content management systems like Umbraco, Drupal, and some other ones. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about it as mentioned before. Let me jump into a short demo on Azure Marketplace. So when you log on to your Azure portal, you can select the plus sign deploying a new Azure resource, and from there you can select the Marketplace. Now the Marketplace, as mentioned, stores about 4,000 items, so we provide a catalog categorized system. Or you can just start browsing here and then pinpointing the different solutions that are available. Or if I want to deploy a database, I can also start searching, and it will provide me a summarized list of all those available solutions. Now let's say I want to deploy an easy web app including SQL Server. Then I just select this resource, I press the Create button, and it will start up a deployment wizard where I need to enter some specific parameters for that specific workload. So as mentioned, it's selecting, deploying, and using. Another approach is not directly from within the Azure portal, but starting from the Azure Marketplace website, which is azure.microsoft.com/enus for English /marketplace, which gives you a full list of all the applications that are available, all the virtual machine images we have. And at the same time, you can again start searching. So what if I'm interested in Microsoft SharePoint? Then out of the search engine, I can deploy SharePoint Online, I can deploy SharePoint Server Trial in a high available setup or not, and even using third-party solutions as mentioned. So let's say I want to deploy Commvault backup for SharePoint. I select my Commvault creating virtual machine, it will automatically redirect me to the Azure portal. If I'm not authenticated yet, then it will ask me for my Azure credentials. But since I'm already pre-authenticated, it will recognize my subscription and it will load that specific appliance in the same scenario as before, allowing me to select my subscriptions and automatically deploying that specific Commvault resource from here. So if I select my Create button, it will again ask me for some easy details, like the virtual machine name that I want to use, IP address if you want, although it's mainly dynamically generated in Azure, selecting the size of the virtual machine, and then deploying not only the Windows-based virtual machine or Linux-based in this scenario, but also installing the application. And after maybe 10-15 minutes, I can log on to the appliance and start using Commvault application. So that's the benefit of using Azure Marketplace. Which brings me to the difference between Azure Service Manager and Azure Resource Manager. If you're a bit familiar with Azure since day one, you might know that Azure Service Manager points to what we like to call the classic Azure, which was the first wave of Azure, has been active for about 5 years, and actually still active nowadays. In Azure Service Manager, or ASM, each Azure resource existed individually, so there was no real classification, no real grouping available. An Azure solution, so a collection of different Azure resources, was called an Azure Cloud Solution, which was based on individual Azure resources. Management was done from the classic portal. The connection URL is manage.windowsazure.com, and we also have service management REST APIs available, allowing you to manage the platform from a development perspective. A virtual machine, as an example, in Azure Service Manager, a virtual machine was deployed in what we call a cloud service. And as already mentioned, Azure Service Manager is still operational today, but more and more workloads are being phased out and migrated to the new Azure version, which is called Azure Resource Manager. Azure Resource Manager was founded in around 2014 and is being described as the second wave of Azure. Each Azure resource gets deployed in what's called an Azure Resource Group. Azure resources can be moved between different resource groups. The management itself is done from another URL, it's portal.azure.com, and we still have REST APIs available, obviously newer ones, specifically for Azure Resource Manager. Taking virtual machines as an example, in Azure Resource Manager, they're being deployed inside the resource group, and deployment is done from ARM templates. So what I showed you in the previous demo from the marketplace, the interesting wizard allowing you to just complete a couple of fields and going from step 1 all the way down to step 5 and having your resource deployed, in background is triggered from an ARM template, which we will cover in one of the next modules. And at the same time, migrations from Azure Service Manager, so the classic Azure, to Azure Resource Manager is supported, but it depends a bit on workloads. But virtual machines, storage, networking components can be easily migrated from Azure Service Manager to Azure Resource Manager. Now, another topic that I want to cover already here is talking about Azure security. We're talking about cloud computing, public cloud computing, so security is a very important, like a really key component in any cloud topology, and especially in public cloud, since it's not the organization anymore being responsible for the management of the data center. Now, quite important, don't rely on your cloud vendor alone. In case of Microsoft Azure, it's basically two ways. Microsoft is responsible for running the data center, for managing the platform, troubleshooting if anything goes wrong with the platform, and providing you specific SLAs for all the services that are available. Where on the organization, the customer side, the customer is responsible for securing what I like to call the consumed service. So imagine you're deploying a web application. Although the underlying platform, the underlying infrastructure, firewalls, security is a key concept, if you're deploying a web application where the coding itself is not really 100% secured, then you might expose an insecure web application and exposing or making it vulnerable for data leaks. So that's up to the customer. An Azure data center and solutions have received many industry certifications. HIPAA, ISO, PCI, Department of Defense in the US, FedRAMP out of the US, and a lot more than those. So my advice here would be to consult the Azure Trust Center, giving you up-to-date information about all security aspects, privacy and compliance regulations on the Azure platform. In this video, I covered a quick overview of Azure, and I would like to invite you to join me to the next video in which I'm going to walk you through Azure subscription models.